Hello everyone, welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck number 154, and it's titled 9 Were Given to Mortal Men. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we are doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, our random card was suggested to us by McKG3 over on Twitter, also known as Mike. You may have seen him a couple of times on this channel before, and his suggestion for us was Nazgul. And originally, when I saw this suggestion, I knew it was going to be a bit of a challenge because, as you may notice, Nazgul has a price tag of $8.27, and since Nazgul allows us to play 9 of the same card, that means we are spending $8.27 on 9 separate cards. That is really hindering the budget of this deck, but that doesn't make it impossible. So let's read through Nazgul, and then I'll start to explain a little bit about what we're doing. So Nazgul is 2 and a black for a 1/2 Wraith Knight. It's got Death Touch. When it enters the battlefield, the ring tempts you. Whenever the ring tempts you, put a +1/+1 counter on each Wraith you control, and a deck can have up to 9 cards named Nazgul. With that in mind, we obviously want to try to find some ways to be tempted by the ring, and I figured if we're really leaning into the Nazgul theme and being tempted by the ring, we may as well add a couple of colors to our commander and run Sauron the Dark Lord. So Sauron is 3 blue, black, red for a 7/6 avatar horror. Ward, sacrifice a legendary artifact or legendary creature. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, Amass Orcs 1. Whenever an army you control deals combat damage to a player, the ring tempts you. And whenever the ring tempts you, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 4 cards. So there is a lot going on here, but it does care about being tempted by the ring, which is something that we wanted to try to stick with the Nazgul. So obviously, the next piece of the deck is to look at how we can combine the Nazgul with Sauron and some other pieces while still remaining under our budget limit. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some of our themes for the deck. And this week, our first theme, we have Nazgul, of course, and more specifically, Wraiths. Because Nazgul says that we put +1/+1 counters on each Wraith we control, we can fill the deck up with ways to make Wraith creatures, or just Wraith creatures in general, to be able to benefit from that, and more than just our Nazgul. So a great example of this is the Lord of the Nazgul, which is 3 blue, black for a 4/3 legendary creature, Wraith Noble. It's got flying. Wraiths you control have protection from ring bearers, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 3/3 black Wraith creature token with menace. Then if you control 9 or more Wraiths, Wraiths you control have base power and toughness 9/9 until the end of turn. This is incredibly useful when we consider the fact that all of our Wraiths, well, I guess not all of our Wraiths, all of our Nazgul are going to be putting +1/+1 counters on all of our Wraiths. So that means that the 9/9 is then going to be boosted by the +1/+1 counters, and that's going to make them large enough that it's really tough to stop them in combat, especially because the tokens we've made with Lord of the Nazgul have menace, so there's really not much our opponents are going to be able to do to stop us. With that in mind, though, we've got all of the Wraiths, we've got all of the Nazgul, we've got ways to make our Nazgul bigger. We also need to deal with Amass. Because Sauron amasses every single time that our opponents cast a spell, we leaned a little bit into the Amass, especially the Amass Orcs, because we want to make sure that we can use cards like Foray of Orcs, which is 3 and a red for a sorcery, Amass Orcs 2. When you do, Foray of Orcs deals X damage to target creature an opponent controls, where X is the amassed army's power. Since we are amassing, hopefully, a huge army, we can use Foray of Orcs as pretty much a removal spell for any creature on the battlefield, provided it doesn't have indestructible, and then we're still left with all of our Wraiths and with our huge army token. Now, that's probably not going to be quite enough to win us the game, so we do also have to lean into our third and final theme, which is reanimation. We have only 9 Nazgul in the deck, and because we're discarding our hand with Sauron, at least when we want to, it's not necessarily a may, but we want to make sure that we can get back our creatures when we need them. So if our Nazgul die, we just rebuy them and do it again. And a great way to do that is with cards like Dig Up the Body, which is 2 and a black for an instant, casualty 1, mill 2 cards, then you may return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Being able to continuously get back the Nazgul means that we can keep getting tempted by the ring, keep putting +1/+1 counters on our things, and eventually get to the point where our opponents may have exhausted all of their board wipes and removal, and they're just still staring down huge Nazgul creatures because we just keep getting them back. So those are our major themes for this week. And of course, we do still have to talk about some of our key cards. These are the cards that really synergize with what the deck is trying to do, and in some cases are win conditions on their own. So the first of the key cards that I want to talk about is Balmor Battlemage Captain. And I know this looks a little bit weird because it's not a Nazgul, it's not a Wraith, it is in fact a bird wizard. Balmor is a blue and a red for a 1/3 bird wizard. It's got flying, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain trample until the end of turn. Nazgul are naturally going to become very, very large, but they don't have a great way to get through in combat because they don't really have any evasion. Balmor, with the casting of a single instant or sorcery, gives them all +1/+0 and, most importantly, trample. Being able to give them all trample, especially when they have Death Touch, is going to be incredibly powerful because no matter what's happening, they're getting through damage, and if we've got Death Touch, we've got trample, then they just deal 1 damage to the defending creature and they trample over the rest. The second key card is going to look a little bit different. That one is Witch King Sky Scourge. So with Balmor, we're getting through on damage. With the Witch King, we're drawing cards. Because Witch King is 5 black-red for a 5/5 legendary creature Wraith Noble. It's got flying. Whenever you attack with 1 or more Wraiths, exile the top X cards of your library where X is their total power. You may play those cards this turn. Then it has Undying. Now, I want to be very upfront about this. This is a great card, but it is also a very dangerous card. Because our Nazgul can have a ton of power at any time, and we can only cast those spells that we exile with Witch King on the turn we exile them, and there's no way to get them back, this can unfortunately mill out a bunch of your deck, because this is not a May trigger. You have to exile the cards, you just don't have to play them. Now, that's fine if we're attacking with maybe 4 or 5 power worth of Wraiths, but if we somehow get to be attacking with like 15, 20 power worth of Wraiths, then it really starts to become an issue. So that is something to be aware of. But despite all of that, being able to exile most of the cards in our deck and then play them is a great way to push through any damage, great way to trigger Balmor because we have now a bunch of other stuff. And it's happening before damage, it's just when we attack, so now anything we hit can be used almost like a combat trick, being able to cast it during combat, maybe get all of our creatures back that die in combat in the second main phase. It's just a great way to select the cards that we want to use. And then finally, moving into our last key card, this is Ring Wraiths. Ring Wraiths is 4 black for a 5/5 Wraith Knight. When Ring Wraiths enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -3/-3 until the end of turn, and if that creature is legendary, its controller loses 3 life. When the ring tempts you, return Ring Wraiths from your graveyard to your hand. This doesn't look super powerful on the surface, but this is essentially repeatable removal in a deck that can be tempted by the ring pretty regularly, which ours can. Being able to play Ring Wraiths and kill something as long as it's got 3 toughness, or make something small enough that it can't really block our stuff profitably, means that we can continuously keep recurring it, keep attacking, keep getting things out of our graveyard, keep casting spells, and eventually get to the point where, yes, it's 6 mana, but being able to replay it multiple times in a turn or multiple times going around the table, it gets out of hand because our opponents just cannot get it to stay dead. Unless, of course, they exile it, but that's a different problem entirely. So, Ring Wraiths definitely worth the slot as a key card and definitely worth the inclusion in the deck, but we got to talk about more than just the key cards. So the next thing for our deck tech is we're going to take a look at some cool interactions. These are cards that synergize well together and in some cases are just kind of fun and interesting cards to talk about. So the first cool interaction that I would like to mention is between Lazotep Chancellor and Vohar Vodalian Desecrator. So Lazotep Chancellor is one of our few non-Amass Orc cards in the deck. It is a blue and a black for a 1/3 zombie wizard. Whenever you discard a card, you may pay 1. If you do, amass 2. So if we don't have an orc army, we will amass on our zombie army, which is not a terrible thing. It doesn't really matter too much if we have a zombie or an orc army, but if we already have an orc army, then we will amass on that instead of making a zombie army, so that is something to pay attention to. But the reason that this is going to be relevant is because when we combine it with Vohar, which is blue and a black for a 1/2 Phyrexian Merfolk Wizard, tap, draw a card, then discard a card. If you discarded an instant or sorcery card this way, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Then we can also pay 2 and sacrifice Vohar. You may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. Activate only as a sorcery. So you can kind of see what's going on here. For only 1 mana, we can tap Vohar, draw a card, discard a card, and then pay that 1 mana to make an Amass 2 zombie, or an orc if that's already out there. So being able to do this every single turn around the table is essentially just a free loot effect with a +1 mana Amass 2 stapled onto it. And if we have any other ways to discard cards, which a little bit of a spoiler, but we do, then Lazotep Chancellor really gets out of hand. And Vohar especially cares about the instants and sorceries that are going to our graveyard, which we're not great at getting back. We're really good at getting back creatures, but Vohar is one of our biggest ways to get back instants and sorceries. So that is cool interaction number 1. And cool interaction number 2 is going to be between Alora, Merry Thief, and Aarakocra Sneak. And yes, I know they are from the same set, so obviously there's a little bit of interaction there. But Alora, Merry Thief, is 2 and a blue for a 3/2 legendary creature halfling rogue. Whenever you attack, up to 1 target attacking creature can't be blocked this turn. Return that creature to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step, and choose a background, but since she's not our commander, we don't have to worry about that. And we can combine that with Aarakocra Sneak, which is 3 and a blue for a 1/4 bird rogue. It's got flying, and when Aarakocra Sneak enters the battlefield, you take the initiative. So obviously, when the sneak comes in, we take the initiative, but then we can attack with the sneak, make it unblockable with Alora, and then return it to our hand so we can cast it again and take the initiative again. This is a great way to kind of double up on the trigger and make sure that we're always getting some form of card advantage. But even beyond the sneak, Alora can also make our Nazgul unblockable, can make our Ring Wraith unblockable, can make anything else that's going on our side of the board unblockable, and then return it to our hand so we can get some of the relevant ETB effects again. Being able to trigger enter the battlefield effects multiple times in a single turn is incredibly powerful, and a great way, like I said earlier, to kind of accrue a little bit of card advantage. But that is the end of our cool interactions, so the next thing we're going to do is take a look at the price of the deck. And because I mentioned the Nazgul being such an expensive piece of this, obviously we're pretty close to our budget limit at $91.33, and the most expensive card in the deck is, of course, something to do with Nazgul, but it's not the Nazgul themselves, it is Witch King Bringer of Ruin, which is 4 black for a 5/3 Wraith Noble. It's got flying. Whenever it attacks, defending player sacrifices a creature with the least power among creatures they control. Now, if we're being perfectly honest, this is really in here because it is a Wraith, and because it's another way to trigger the +1/+1 counters. It's technically removal, even though it's not great removal. So that is really why it's here. I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not quite sure why it is so expensive. My gut reaction is that it probably was in one of the Jumpstart packs instead of the actual set, but I don't know for sure. But Witch King Bringer of Ruin is very good. However, if you do need to trim it for budget purposes, it doesn't play an integral role to the deck and could be cut if need be, so that is something to consider. On the other hand, if you're looking for a card to put into the deck, that technically isn't out of the budget, because if you look at our actual budget, this could go in. I do have a suggestion for you there as well, and the reason that this didn't make it into the deck, if we're being honest, is simply because I forgot. So if you were to buy this deck and try to put it together, my recommendation would be to put in Call of the Ring and take out Calibrated Blast. And I know you're probably looking at Call of the Ring and thinking, why in the world did I miss this? Or how did I miss this? I genuinely do not know, but if you were to put this deck together, definitely put Call of the Ring in the deck, because it is 1 in a black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, the ring tempts you. Whenever you choose a creature as your ring bearer, you may pay 2 life. If you do, draw a card. I think what might have happened here is that I originally saw this card as a once a turn effect. We just, at the start of our upkeep, ring tempts you, and we get to pay 2 life and draw a card. I wasn't considering that whenever we choose a ring bearer, we get to pay 2 life and draw a card. And there's a lot of ring tempting in this deck because of the Nazgul. And of course, this is just a free ring tempting trigger, which also triggers the Nazgul. So again, I'm not sure how I missed this card in the deck building, but definitely put it in if you get the chance. And if you're going to put it in, then obviously we got to take a card out. And the card I would recommend replacing is Calibrated Blast. So Calibrated Blast is 2 and a red for an instant. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card. Put the revealed cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. When you reveal a non-land card this way, Calibrated Blast deals damage equal to that card's mana value to any target, and it has flashback for 3 red. Now, this one I will take a bit of a hit for, because honestly, Calibrated Blast is kind of a pet card of mine. I try to put it in a lot of decks, and I just have not gotten it to work quite yet. But the main reason it's here is because we have so much discard and so much mill. It's got flashback. It's a great way to at least remove something or do something to deal with what's happening on the board. But if we're being honest, it doesn't do that most of the time. It doesn't do enough damage for it to be relevant, especially at 5 mana for flashback. I keep trying it, and unfortunately this might be my sign that it's just not working out, because I have yet to put it into a deck and have it actually do something, which is a shame because I do really like the design of this card, but I'll take the loss on that one, unfortunately. So this is a suggestion that I have. If you were to put this deck together, it is something that I noticed well too late into the design process. I'd already put the deck together and had it ready to go, so I couldn't quite drop it at that point. But that is my suggestion, and so now, the next thing we'd have to do, obviously, is take a look at how this deck performs in a game and see how it functions from there. Before we get to that point, though, if you have a chance, I would recommend checking us out on some other social media accounts, such as Twitter at 13POYNZ, Reddit u/POYNZ13, or send us an email, dungeonlearnersguide@gmail.com. And if you're looking to help support the channel, you can, as always, just like the video and subscribe to the channel. I would very much appreciate all of that. And a huge thank you to everyone who's helped us get to 1,000 subscribers. That is a huge number, and genuinely not a number I ever thought I would hit when I started this channel. So thank you all so much. But if you'd like to support a little bit more than that, you can also head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, and right here on YouTube as a channel member, where you get access to things like the deck lists a week early. You get access to a Discord channel where we brew up a lot of the decks and also play the games that appear on this channel. You can get the unedited gameplay videos. You can get a random card sent to you every single month. And of course, you also get the guarantee from me that any cards you suggest for this channel will show up in a deck tech eventually. It might take me a little while, but I promise I will get there for our patrons and channel members. So obviously, if you'd like to join the amazing people listed below, that is a way you can do that. And to shout out the amazing people listed below, we have William Swiftfoot, Doodle, Eric Hui, Jeff Winger, Jeffrey Boos, Salty and Sunshine, Tyler Esme, Sven von Nimwegen, Paddywhack, and Richard. So to all of you, thank you all so much. And without any more rambling, let's jump into the game. So this week, we are going to be joined by 3 separate opponents. In this case, it's going to be Jason playing Eowyn, Shield Maiden, Shawn playing Rocco, Cabaret Caterer, and Richard playing Ishin, Two Heavens as One. So the Eowyn deck from Jason is a human deck. It's mostly the precon, but he has updated it just a little bit. So he really wants to just flood the board with a bunch of humans. Then he wants to control 6 or more humans with Eowyn to draw cards, make more humans with the knights, and just kind of snowball out of control. I've played this deck a couple of times at this point, and it always becomes a bit of a problem, so I'm very interested to see how we match up against a very aggressive board state. I imagine our creatures will be a lot bigger, but I also imagine he'll have a lot more, so that'll be a lot of fun to see how that plays out. Next up, we have Shawn and his Rocco Cabaret Caterer deck, and this is through and through a combo deck. He wanted to try to find a way to break Food Chain, which I understand is not the hardest thing to do in the world because Food Chain is an incredibly easy combo piece, but his entire goal was to find ways to combo with it that don't involve tutoring it up specifically. I know he's got ways to search up different creatures, including his commander, but not being able to search up the enchantment makes it a little bit more of a toolbox style deck, and he only really leans back on the enchantment when he desperately needs it, or just if he happens to draw it. So I'm very interested to see how this goes. I don't think that it'll be our most complicated deck at the table to face, mainly because we have a little bit of counter spells. We can hopefully just counterspell the Food Chain when it comes down, but we'll see. And then last but not least, we have Richard playing Ishin, 2 Heavens is 1. This is another deck that has shown up on the channel before. It is technically more of a group hug / pillow fort style deck. I don't think group hug's the right word that I'm looking for, but the general idea is he wants to play cards that prevent his opponents from attacking him or trigger when an opponent attacks him, so that way he can double up on those triggers and kind of ward himself off from the rest of the table until he's able to close out the game with some of his own attackers. I think it's a super unique take on Ishin, and I'm a big fan of this deck every time it shows up, so hopefully we'll get to see it do some cool things. But I do think that Ishin is probably the deck that I'm the most worried about, just because I know how strong doubling your abilities can be. So we will see how this deck plays out. We will see how our opponent's decks play out. I hope you all enjoyed the deck tech. I hope you will enjoy the game. If you do, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's see how we do, and I will see you all once it's done. At the start of the game, I go first, followed by Jason, Shawn, and then Richard. On my first turn, I play a Temple of Deceit, scrying 1. Jason plays a Tranquil Cove, gaining a life. Shawn plays a Forest. Richard plays a Restless Fortress. I play a Mountain. Jason casts a Soul Ring, uses the Soul Ring to cast Arcane Signet, then also cast Wayfarer's Bauble, but he does miss his second land drop. Shawn plays a Plains and casts Talisman of Unity. Richard plays a Command Tower and casts Boros Signet. I play an island and cast Nazgul, being tempted by the ring when it enters, making it my ring bearer and putting a +1/+1 counter on each Wraith I control whenever I'm tempted by the ring. Jason sacrifices Wayfarer's Bauble, searching his library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. Shawn casts Cultivate, searching his library for 2 basic lands, putting one into play tapped and the other into his hand. Then he plays a Terramorphic Expanse, sacrificing it to search his library for another basic land, putting it into play tapped. Richard plays a Rugged Prairie and casts Phyrexian Arena, letting him draw a card and lose a life in his upkeep. I cast another Nazgul, being tempted by the ring and putting 2 +1/+1 counters on each Wraith I control. I then attack Jason for 4 with my ring bearer, letting me draw a card and discard a card. Then, in my second main phase, I play an Izzet Boilerworks, returning a mountain to my hand. Jason plays an island and casts Boromir Gondor's Hope, looking at the top 6 cards of his library when it enters, and revealing a human or artifact from among them, putting it into his hand and putting the rest on the bottom of his library. With this trigger, he puts Talisman of Progress into his hand and immediately casts it. Shawn casts a Commander Sphere and also casts Devoted Druid, which can tap for a green mana to put a -1/-1 counter on itself to untap itself. In Richard's upkeep, he draws an additional card and loses a life. Then he plays a Mountain and casts his commander Ishin, 2 Heavens is 1, letting him double any effect of his that would trigger from a creature attacking. After that, he cast Guild Artisan, letting Richard make 2 treasure tokens whenever Ishin attacks an opponent who isn't at the lowest life total. On my turn, I move straight to combat, attacking Richard for 4 with my Ring Bearer, drawing a card, discarding a card. Then, in my second main phase, I cast Azure Fleet Admiral, becoming the Monarch when it enters. Then I play a Rakdos Carnarium, returning an island to my hand, and draw for being the Monarch at the end of my turn. Jason attacks Shawn for 3 with Boromir, looking at the top 6 cards of his library and putting Baragond of the Guard into his hand from among them. In his second main phase, Jason cast Baragond of the Guard, giving all his creatures +1/+1 in Vigilance until the end of turn, whenever Baragond or another human enters under his control. He also cast Rising of the Day, giving all his creatures haste and his legendary creatures +1/+0. On Shawn's turn, he cast Food Chain, letting him exile a creature he controls to make mana of any color equal to 1 plus the creature's mana value, but he can only spend it to cast creatures. After that, he's able to cast his commander, Rocco, Cabaretti Caterer, for X equals 3, searching his library for Squee the Immortal, putting it into play. Since Squee can be cast from exile and Food Chain creates 1 more mana than it costs to recast Squee, Shawn is able to use both cards to generate infinite mana of any one color. Once he's got infinite mana, he's able to use Food Chain to exile Rocco, recasting it to put Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker and Zealous Conscripts into play. Using Kiki-Jiki, he can tap it to create a copy of Zealous Conscripts, which untaps Kiki-Jiki when it comes into play. With this combo, he's able to create infinite Zealous Conscripts, all of which have haste, knocking out the rest of the table and winning Shawn the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. Definitely a very short game. That is so far the shortest game we've had this year. Lasted only about 5 turns, which is a little unfortunate. Nobody really got the chance to show off what they were capable of. I know Jason's deck and Richard's deck really didn't get off the ground too much. Jason especially because he got stuck on lands very early on. But I do think that they were starting to ramp up to do some cool things. We got off to a very quick start. Being able to have multiple Nazguls by turn 4 was very good for our deck, and I think that if we'd had just a couple more turns, we really could have flooded the board with everything we were doing. It wasn't quite to be the case, though, as of course Shawn did find his Food Chain a lot faster than expected. He did draw it naturally, which is to be expected sometimes, so very, very cool. Being able to see the lines of how Shawn was able to kind of tutor through his deck to find the winning pieces was very cool. And I think that one of the things that is good to know about this deck in the future is that it really does rely on the Food Chain, and we were kind of joking during the game about killing the Devoted Druid because it was a combo piece sitting on the board and we didn't really trust it. And then Shawn untaps and combos with something that wasn't the Devoted Druid, which I thought was kind of funny. So a very good game all around. Hopefully we'll get the chance to check out some more of these decks in the future. But let me know down in the comments what you thought of the game. Let me know what you thought of the deck tech. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I know I certainly did. And thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.